Here we are again for the latest episode of Boardroom RevOps, where we're bringing you valuable tips from RevOps experts so you can make it to the C-suite. I'm James, co-founder of Accounting, the analytics and planning solution for strategic RevOps teams. I'm joined by Pete Matthews today, the founder of Trinsx and a longtime RevOps leader. Pete, thanks for joining me.
Hey, great to be here. Happy Monday.
Pete is our first repeat podcast guest, so we're super excited about that. We had such a good first conversation touching on a variety of subjects, including kind of tactical versus strategic RevOps and what that means. But Pete and I were so interested in that conversation that we've continued a lot of conversation offline, and we figured we've had enough back and forth that it was time to do another podcast on everything we've covered. So that's what we're going to jump into today is a deep dive, kind of strategic RevOps. So let's just jump right into it. Pete, there's debate over if RevOps even should be strategic, but let's maybe set the table first with a couple questions. First, as a primer or a refresher, what even is RevOps strategy or strategic RevOps?
So great. This is a great opener. I love this question when you brought it to me because it put a lot of thought into, what is that? What does that really mean? Right? And it's so easy to get bogged down in the tactics. So I developed kind of a one line to try and consolidate it. It's the execution of the CRO or go-to-market executives' vision to gain a strategic advantage by optimizing go-to-market effectiveness and efficiency. Right? So your whole look as a strategic is CRO might be setting the vision, where the company's heading, what are the strong growth plans. RevOps needs to figure out how to do that effectively with the most amount of efficiency possible.
That's great. I think that does a good job of tying actually to outcomes, right? Why are we actually here in RevOps? I think that kind of touches on this, but anything else you add on why it's important that RevOps focus on acting strategically? It can be such a tactical role. So why does RevOps need to kind of keep the strategy piece in mind?
It's about accelerating growth. So, you and I have been in small companies. We've grown, and a lot of the early stages, you're just run faster. But at some point, as you grow, that growth you can't continuously to run faster. You need some efficiencies out of it. And as it comes to grow, part of the initiative is efficiency to achieve that greater growth out of existing campaigns, employees, and infrastructure. How do you optimize it? It's no different than a manufacturing plant. Sales is a process. Demand gen is a process. RevOps, one of the RevOps goal is to continuously look at that process, right, and make it more effective, more efficient, to get rid of the bottlenecks, right, to help them achieve their goals. And then on the other side is turning data into intelligence. This is I love this part. This is where RevOps can really guide the direction of a company, give them strategic telling information to executives in a timely manner to make key decisions, right? And the key is they're timely. Everything moves so fast. It's a lot of pressure, but it's really rewarding when you can do that for them.
Yeah, the last piece is definitely near and dear to our hearts at Accounting, because that's why we started the business. We think it's the single greatest lever that a RevOps team or leader can have. Well, let's put some more specifics to this if we can. You've walked me through your strategic planning matrix a number of times now. I love it. I don't know if you want to kind of pull it up and share it for folks that are watching, but maybe just kind of give us a refresher on how you think about that matrix, what it is, how you've laid it out, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been doing marketing ops, sales ops, and RevOps for almost 20 years. And this has been developed over probably the last 7 or 8 years to really understand if RevOps can be strategic. So the way this is laid out is everything essentially falls into 4 categories at the top. And then down the side, the top 2 rows are the strategic focuses for RevOps. The bottom 2 rows drive into more tactical areas of our functions. It's easy to keep following down into this and do those things because RevOps is constantly busy and putting out fires. But this was built to guide those who really want to be strategic to focus on those top 2 layers. The top columns, planning, accountability, infrastructure, and enablement. Those are the categories essentially all the tasks that we're responsible for fall into to help guide those folks.
Yeah, this is great. So I almost feel and correct me if I'm wrong, but this is sort of like a self-assessment. So if I'm, leading a RevOps team, or even if I'm in the mid layer and I'm thinking through all of the laundry list of things I'm doing on a daily basis, how do I understand if I'm actually acting strategically and adding real value to the business? Is that how you think about this as a self-assessment tool and an aspirational roadmap, so to speak, or is there kind of a different use case here?
No, that's a great way to look at it. So I consult with a lot of companies and I bring this to the table, right? What are they doing? Where are they bringing the value in here? So this is a great reminder for those trying to achieve the strategic goal that you need to look at that top two layers to maintain a strategic focus. And it's so easy to fall into the bottom one because there's so many problems facing you, right? This is a great reminder. I look at it consistently, probably on a weekly basis with my clients as to am I achieving those goals in those areas and maintaining the strategy.
That's great. I mean, if it's good enough for you, who's led RevOps across a number of companies, consulting with a number of big companies too, it's certainly good enough for folks running lean teams as well. Let's maybe pick a couple examples and get specific. I don't know, maybe accountability or technology or any one that you choose. Like maybe walk me through like why are the actions at the top of the column here kind of more strategic than those at the bottom? Why are they important?
So yeah, let's take a couple examples here, James. The one I find easily to talk to and very relatable is accountability. And under accountability, you have two columns, measurement and analytics. So measuring is what are you measuring? And analytics is the turning that data and those metrics into information, right? So at the very bottom, we tend to think about helping salespeople or understanding a campaign's effectiveness on the marketing side as a very tactical, is it doing well? Is that person doing well, etc. At the top, at the very top, right, is the organization as a company whole meeting their goals? So if I'm a software company and running a SaaS program, how's my MR, how's my turnover going through as a company as a whole? If we're working well, then great. Everyone's doing that, right? They're pulling their weight, and then there's, giving good signs, right? If there are holes, then you go down a layer. What programs aren't working? What teams aren't working? And that's how you look at it strategically, or how the executives look at it strategically. Then as RevOps, you need to transition, right? How do you continue deep down to find those issues and challenges that you're facing as well? So as we work up this, you have, let's take marketing. You have a campaign that's functioning, or several campaigns, and you might have 3 campaigns under a lead generation that are functioning. You go up to the function campaign, and now you're looking at lead gen as a whole. You move up a notch, and then you're looking at the team or the program functions as a whole as a campaign. How are all the campaigns doing? And I like campaigns because typically marketing programs are running tons of campaigns at any given time. Our job in RevOps is to figure out, of all those programs, which ones are generating 80% of the revenue or the opportunities, right? Those ones is where you pour the money in and your resources in, and it's like a flywheel effect. This is where, again, the strategic thinking comes in as RevOps. Out of, let's say you're running 20 programs, which 7 or 8 are creating 80% of the revenue, and that's where you focus your attention. Then at the executive level, they can see that marketing is driving those opportunities, which can lead into the new revenue goals.
Yeah, that's great. I love it's kind of like almost oscillation. Like you have to have the tactical as the foundation to set up any of this, but then you want to up level it to the executive level of how is this actually impacting the business. But then as you find issues or hiccups or even anything great, you kind of have to go back down to the tactical to figure out why or to troubleshoot things as well. So I think like what I've seen this too from chatting with so many RevOps folks is like the most effective RevOps leaders can kind of straddle and oscillate between those two, right? So I actually think this like vertical matrix is a really good way to think about that.
Yeah, absolutely. This also means you have to have a really good team in place, right? If you want to stay at the executive level, you got to have a team that's functioning underneath you to give you that information as well.
Yeah, we touched on this a little bit in the first podcast, but remind me how you think about that. I know you said your first hire for any engagement or new company you join is like a really good BI analyst or data analyst for lack of better words. Like how else do you think about, running a team to cover the full gamut of strategic to tactical?
Ooh, great question. So I look at a team as everybody on my team needs to understand how metrics work. Everyone on my team needs to understand how they're implemented and what comes out of them. I look at the business analyst as pulling all of that information together into and converting it into business intelligence. And that's the key to one of the key values of revenue operations is making that transition. And then that business analyst can drive that information, which ultimately guides the company. So if we take the accountability under the analytics portion, my teams are looking at historical performance on every one of the things who they're working with. So whether it's the marketing, salespeople, right? They're looking at that historical performance to understand if it's working. And my BI hire is looking at that performance analysis as a whole. The next thing is that BI person and myself are working together, and we're going and making assumptions and theories as to where this is leading, right? What's the future? So that transition from how it's doing in the past to what can possibly garnish to the future is where that strategic component comes in. And then translating that into executive language, into predictive analytics. And the farther you can look out, the more valuable your information is.
Yeah, that's so great. And I think I actually had a professor in business school, not to over intellectualize this, talk about how important like forecasting is too. Obviously like forecasting where you're going to land from a new business perspective, but even just the ability, when you can prove that you can forecast anything well, it means you really understand the drivers of the business. And that's kind of how you become like that strategic partner and get a seat at the table, right? Prove you really understand what actually moves the business. You can back it with data.
Yeah, absolutely. And you bring up a real good point because that's hard. Right? People don't understand that your first 12-month lookout or 18-month lookout is going to be wrong. So you need to have the discipline to see it through, because over time, as the teams are looking at it, it gets better over that time. Right? So one of the things you have to come in is a solid confidence in the data to bring that predictive analytics. You have to be daring enough to be wrong, but quick enough to adjust based on that as well.
I'm conscious of time here, Pete, so I want to shift the conversation slightly. We touched on this a little bit leading up to it, but RevOps strategy starts with like the leader of the function, the head of RevOps, right? And so what are the top 2 or 3 kind of strategic skills that a good RevOps leader really needs to be thinking about having?
So one of the things that I find rare, but I believe it's important, is as you're looking at your team or your company, think about how every year you're going to get 10 to 20% more out of your go-to-market team. So ask that question. I ask it every quarter, right? How am I going to get 10 to 20% more out of the go-to-market team? Now, you're not the visionary of where the company's heading, not necessarily driving lead, but you can look at the efficiency and the effectiveness of the team based on the planning, accountability, and infrastructure, enable it to garnish that 20%. So that's one. You need to transition to that thought. Ability to transition from pure problem solver to visionary executioner, right? You're going to sit, if you're in the budget and campaign planning meetings at the top, your job is to how do you execute on that vision and bring it to fruition as well. And not just, hey, this is this week's problem that you need to go solve. One big one you can see at the top of enablement is change management. This is a very difficult thing, but has to start within. This is something you can learn. You can go get certified and build out into it. But learn that change management, because as the companies grow, you need to be one strategic. How are you going to create an entire team to change over to a new vision or a new execution or a new system that's coming around as well? I would say those are the 3 most important.
Those are really good. I'd love to unpack them just a little bit deeper. I think the first one was really clear. The second one, going from problem solver to visionary execution focus. Like, say more a little bit about that. Like, what do each of those mean in like a little bit more detail, and how can folks orient their mind to kind of make that shift?
Yeah. So the last time you and I talked, right, you asked me what 3 words I think described a RevOps leader. And I said, an incredible problem solver. So you need to solve the problem at a strategic level. So what we tend to fall into is the CRM is broken and can't get my data out. So I got to go chase that down. Or it's not, the metrics aren't going. And it's easy to fall into that state. While that's important, right, we need to solve that. The better idea strategically is, and I'll give you a great example. One of the companies I worked for was developing 2 new strategies. One, going after enterprise accounts and rearranging the territories to drive effectiveness across US and European markets in there. Standard strategy to go do that, but comes with a lot of changes. We had to change the CRM. We had a new team coming in. We had to enable that team. We had to train them. We had to buy new tools, right? So all of that comes into play when you're thinking visionary executioner, right? How do you take, hey, the company's doing two new things, but how do you bring that all in infrastructure and enable it to make sure that they're effective? That's what I mean by solving that problem at a strategic level.
Yeah, that's great. It is just like a total up leveling, right? It's almost like the atomic unit is different, where the problem solving level that is important, but we want to move up from is like very discrete. I can't get my data out of the CRM, but then like the executing on a vision is like taking a full initiative, and how do I execute everything around it that has to happen, right? So like moving up market to enterprise, that's like a business initiative and a priority, whereas like getting the data out of your CRM is not a business initiative, right? Is that also like a good way to think about this difference?
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it. Absolutely.
Yeah. I think that's how you become like a confidant to the C-suite too. You take their goals and their vision and you just put it into work. And so I think that's
Yeah, they have to know that they can trust you, that their vision is once they put it in place, that you're at the table and going to make that happen, right? You can still bring problems to them, like, hey, if you're going to bring on the team, but our job is to put the planning and all the infrastructure enablement and accountability in place for that new team.
Yeah. And then tell me more about change management, which was the third skill that you mentioned for a strategic RevOps leader. Like, obviously, change management is really hard. Obviously, it's really important because without it, all of that work you did doesn't actually come to fruition too. But why does it land on your kind of top 3 list? Like, why is it so important in your mind?
Because people find it hard to change in what they're doing. It is, we as humans, right, want to keep doing what we think is working. But in the classic case, right, what got us here as a company is not going to get us there. So if you're transitioning from $100 to $200 million software company, what is it going to take to get to 500 million or a billion? That requires change management skills. And you're going to change the way teams think, way campaigns are managed for effectiveness and efficiency, which also means you're going to change everything from the process. So going back to the previous example of we have building an enterprise team to handle big accounts, that was a whole new process, right? And that came with bringing new campaigns as well as our sales team making adjustments in there. So what is that, how do you do that? Well, one, there's a great program called Crucial Conversations that does this very well. And it's a matrix of motivating the teams, which I would, work with our CROs of the world and help them do the motivation. So team leaders, CRO, they're the motivation. How do you drive that team and get them to do it? There's the other component is enablement. How to make sure that they have the right tools, the right training, the right metrics, and the right data so that they're successful. And all that changes as you move up that stack, as you think about it.
Yeah, that's great. You touched on it a little bit, so we may have covered it enough already, but any other advice on like how folks can develop these 3 really important skills?
Well, this is a challenge because RevOps is relatively new. It's less than probably 10 years old, right? So how does someone jump into it? It's new, it's exciting. Certainly, it's a thrill to get in there to figure out whether you can have an effect on the company because it can have a great effect. One is I break it down into 3 categories, right? Hard skills. So like change management, you can go out and get certified in a change management course and learn it, which is great. Implementing that, and I'll take salespeople for example, into salespeople is really challenging. So that's a hard skill, but the soft skill for bringing that to fruition is really challenging. So soft skills, that's the next one. How do you negotiate? How do you bring in what you believe is going to do to a team that's already effective at what they do? One, working with salespeople are really good at what I call business life lessons. They're unforgiving, they teach you fast, and you have to adapt fast as well. So learning, they'll bring a lot of soft skills, so that life experience, you have to dig in and get through that. You can still do life, soft skill training, but you need the experience to bring that into as well. The last one is what I call life lessons. I like to not only hire for skills, but I like to for culture or characteristics. One, you have to have adaptability, have to be an incredible problem solver. You have to have thick skin, become a psychology major, broad problem solving, and work to make others great in there, right? Is one of the key things. And none of that is typically taught anywhere that you can found. You have to dive in and do that. So it's one of the reasons I built this matrix out here is those are some of the things you need to learn to be able to be effective.
Yeah, I think it's such a good framework. Soft skills really stands out to me too, especially working with sales reps. To your point, any like life lessons or salient pieces of wisdom on that kind of like negotiation front, like things you've learned that work well? I know every company is different, every project is different, but any other advice on like how to do that negotiation piece really well that comes to mind?
Listen to hear. Our go-to-market teams are under a lot of pressure. Our job is to listen to them. Listening is easy, and it can easily turn into, hey, they're just complaining. One of the skills that I teach folks is how do you convert complaints into, is it important to make a change or to fix it as well? So listening to hear what's the real problem. How do you garnish all of that into a transferable solution that helps them achieve their goals? And the ability to, wade through all the static, right, into what's important to the team as well. That takes time to develop and be able to convert that into meaningful solutions.
Really good advice. We have a few minutes left here, Pete. I wanted to cover at a high level, going back to your strategic planning matrix, those kind of 4 categories. And we could probably have an entire podcast episode on each one of them. So I'll kind of leave it up to you to cover, the highlights of what you think is most important for each. So I want to kind of frame this up of like how to think about doing each of these 4 buckets well, kind of in a nutshell. Again, understanding that we'll lose some nuance based on the time constraints we have. But starting with planning, which was one of the first buckets there on that matrix, like what are the most important things a RevOps leader needs to know to do this well on the planning front?
Yeah. So planning, the executive team is going to walk in, let's take the beginning of a new fiscal year. They're going to say, we have this much money to accomplish these goals. And those are going to drive down into each organization of what they can use. Our job as RevOps for the go-to-market teams to understand that budget, have input to that budget, all right, of whether it can be done, and then develop all the accountability infrastructure enablement within that budget for the CRO. Our job is to allocate and manage to make sure that budgets are met and they're having an effective on the growth goals as well. And then annual marketing and sales planning, being part of that process of what campaigns are coming out, what's new, is there new products coming out, et cetera, and enabling all of those campaigns to be effective. Same way with the sales planning process. How many teams do you have? What's the growth plan? What licenses you need? What technology you need that you need to make them more effective as well. So working within what your limitations are budget-wise.
Yeah, that is so important, but like a Herculean task, it feels like, right? But like arguably the most strategic possible thing you could do for a business. So without having to go too deep, like what's your advice to execute this? We talked earlier about having the data to understand performance, which I think is really important. But like this feels kind of like a boil the ocean exercise. So like in your experience, if you were to give someone 1 or 2 tips on like how to do this successfully, what would your advice be?
On budgeting?
Yeah, on budgeting or just planning generally. Yeah.
1, develop strong relationships with the head of those departments. They need to know that they can trust you, right? That you have their back and you can execute on their vision of what's going in. So that's first and foremost. 2, adaptability, right? Everyone's going to lay out a campaign plans and budget plans, and none of those are going to be the same at the end of the year, right? So we need to be able to adapt and offer guidance to them on how to enable that adaptability for their teams in there.
Yeah, that's great advice. Any pitfalls in the planning process that you've war wounds or scars you have from the past that you would counsel people away from?
Tons. I used to be taller. So one, get a seat at the table. And this I can't iterate enough. What tends to happen is we get busy or someone's driving us down into tactical problem solving and they forget or we don't get a seat at the table. Picture this. Someone is giving you a budget that you had no input on and now you're required to manage to it. And that's a pitfall that you have to be careful at a strategic level. Get yourself at the seat of the table, which also means you need to speak their language. And they need to trust you in there as well. And the other is that adaptability. I know it's easy to stick to the plan because that was the plan. But if you can foresee that something's not going to work, that's a really highly valuable trait in a RevOps leader. Hey, Mr. Boss, this is coming down the pipe. We're going to hit a roadblock. Okay, and then offer that solution to get around it.
That's great. Moving on to accountability here, which is kind of the next category in this planning matrix. We talked a bit about like metrics as being the driver of accountability in many cases, and in fact the subsections here under accountability are measurement and analytics, so that fits in well. I've personally seen so many companies kind of get analysis paralysis with too many metrics, again talking about boiling the ocean, and so none of it really gets used well. How can you as a RevOps leader make sure that companies are like actually using data to drive behavior as intended?
Yeah, and you and I have talked about this, right? Chain metrics. And chain metrics start at the top. For those who didn't see the last one, chain metrics are at the top of what the company uses to drive information that drives the direction of the company and whether it's doing well. And that should be, as RevOps, should be able to tie that to the frontline person or campaign that's happening. And that is all connected. That's how you keep the focus. So yes, I hear you, everybody wants data. Everyone wants you to pull the data, and it's can be daunting just to get in there and pull 27 different directions. But if you understand how the company is driven at a strategic level, it carves out all the noise of what's important. And one way to do that is maintain what's important to the company and how those changes, as well as on the enable standpoint. If you're being constantly bombarded by requests on certain data, enable those people to do it at themselves at a tactical level. You'll save yourself a lot of heartbreak as well and pain.
Great. And I love how that ties in with everything too. From a chain metrics perspective, if you are actually aligned on, from a planning perspective, what executives really care about, and then you've done that chain exercise, it's going to naturally have people looking at that data because those conversations are going to be coming up naturally as well, versus I've seen some companies like, well, we want to be data driven, so they try and look at everything, but then management doesn't actually care about some of those things, and so that's how all of that work kind of goes in the garbage can. So I think that's great.
Yeah, absolutely. And that helps you like, well, that's great, but it's not what the company is driven by.
Yeah. Okay, time check here. Moving on to infrastructure to make sure we can kind of fit this in. The data piece here really sticks out to me. So I see kind of towards the top, customer data strategy, master data management planning. What are the goals of a data strategy? Like, why is this so important?
So the first time you touch a client is in the go-to-market team, right? Whether it's marketing or sales team, that's the first time you encounter them, whether you buy the data, whether they come in through the website. It's important. It has been proven. If you get that right at the beginning, it tends to stay right throughout that whole customer journey process as well. Right. So putting that plan together and how you capture that saves you a lot of time, heartbreak, and accuracy at the end of the day. So pulling that all together is really important. Second, as that data grows, it becomes a valuable asset within the company, and making sure that customer data strategies in how it works is key. Your marketing and sales teams are going to ask for and pull that data for their campaigns and efforts. And you need to make sure that whatever data goes out clean, and then when it comes back in, this is the one I think most people forget, if there's action on that data, there's also more data to collect and need to pull that back in. So it's important to get it right at the beginning.
Yeah, I'm so with you on this. Again, it's near and dear to our heart at Accounting. I would love for you to unpack even more in case it's not obvious for folks listening, why is that data such a valuable asset?
Well, the best example, right, is Amazon. If Amazon was for sale today, on the right hand of the balance sheet, there would be customer data information, right? It's probably one of the most valuable components of their business infrastructure. So that's an extreme example, but it also applies to smaller companies. If you have good customer data, you can then better predict where the market's going, whether you're effective, whether your campaigns and salespeople are gaining the trust and value of those customers, as well as what's the experience on the customer side. So one of the things that people look at is, how's my customer experience? We're doing surveys, constant surveys, but the data is one of the most telling points of how well and effective you are. So having that data strategy come in so you can measure the positive experience out of that is just as valuable, maybe even more as well.
Really well put. Data also feels like a very daunting task as a whole, and I personally feel like it's never finished. How should a RevOps lead think about executing on a data strategy?
So one of the questions I like to ask companies, are you a collect everything now and sort it out later company, which I think many of us are, or are you pulling in data as it's needed? So back to where I think chain metrics are effective and the vision of the company where it's headed is effective. If you focus on that and go look at what data you need just to solve that, saves a lot of heartache and resources to gather all of that data. It is very, very expensive to capture it all now. We'll deal with it later versus pulling it in the beginning, getting it right, and only collecting that which you need to drive the company strategy as well.
So
Right?
maybe very tactically laying out what exactly do we want to be looking at and why, and then just working through how do we collect it, how do we make sure it's clean, how do we use it? Is that kind of like the recommended action on that front?
Yeah, let's go back to my example when have a company that's now doing enterprise account teams, building an enterprise accounts. And we had to change the ABM model. We had to change the marketing campaigns. We had to change what data we pulled. We had to go find the data on how many opportunities and potential, what's the total available market, and pulling that all information. Now, if that's your first start, that's a daunting task. But if you focus on just enterprise accounts and what is needed just to get started, that brings it down into a very manageable level. And understand and accept that you're not going to gather all the information on every enterprise account today, just what you need to get going.
Well, we're nearly at time here, Pete. I feel like we talked a lot about change management today, or at least a good amount, which is one of the bigger pieces of enablement. But anything you would cover on enablement to round this out that we haven't already talked about today? Maybe what's important to be thinking about, how to put it into practice at a strategic level? Anything that we missed, or do you think it was well covered?
Oh, no, I think we did a great job. The one thing I think I would ask is the one thing we didn't talk about is process optimization. Right. So we talked at the beginning, getting revenue is a process. Learn this skill because it does several things. One, it gets everybody on board, right? How does this function through the company? And it reduces the silos around them because you identify the processes and who owns them. Second, all your systems work on processes. They're logical software. Those processes are important to make sure your infrastructure and the technology work most effectively as well. So that's what I believe is a core function of RevOps to manage that as well.
I think that's a good place to end it. I think the strategic planning matrix is really helpful. I appreciate you putting it together and sharing it with us, Pete. I suspect that based on our past conversations, we'll have you on for a third time at some point because we can always wax poetic about RevOps together, and it's great. And we also have a lot of exciting stuff in the pipeline around career pathing and stuff, so I'm excited to keep working with you on that front. And for those listening, stay tuned as we'll have some exciting announcements on that front too. But yeah, thanks again, Pete. This was really fun.
Thanks for James. Again, it's always a pleasure. It's great working with you.
Awesome.